no way for a taxi driver to recoup the losses during a shift. Faced with this inevitable failure of drivers to respond, the TLC responded with the stick. Former Assistant Commissioner Epstein testified at a city council hearing that the TLC issued over 5,000 summonses to taxi drivers. When there were only 3,500 rides and 5,000 summonses, clearly something was not working. A driver who received a summons for driving a vehicle that he would not otherwise receive a summons would not return to that vehicle. The program became extremely costly for the owners and managers. When we purchased those vehicles at auction, we knew that this program would be more expensive for us. We knew that these vehicles are more expensive than the cars that were on the road. We knew that they were harder to maintain. We knew that their parts were harder to obtain and harder to fix and more expensive. What we did not know is that we would be thrust into a program where the drivers would be forced to lose money. As they were forced to lose money, only 762 drivers out of the 46,749 drivers chose to enlist into the program. That driver pool shrunk. That drove our driver pool to a mere fraction, 1.6% of all drivers. That's our customer base. Many of these taxis now sit unoccupied, not being driven in the garages because we simply do not have licensed drivers who are eligible to drive these vehicles. Instead of serving the disabled community, these cars are sitting empty. The program is now also illegal and dangerous because although this Assembly and the New York State Senate passed Vehicle and Traffic Law 1225, making it illegal to operate a vehicle while using handheld portable devices, the TLC actually encouraged and distributed BlackBerries to drivers. This practice was so outrageous that Fox News reporter Arnold Diaz aired a shame, shame, shame segment on television. Despite the TLC's assertion that drivers were encouraged to pull over, that was impossible. They gave 120 seconds to respond to a dispatch call. 120 seconds to respond to a dispatch call while driving, and while driving on, there are at least, we looked at it, there are at least 50 roads and thoroughfares in the city of New York where it is illegal to pull over. So you would either get the summons for failing to respond within 120 seconds, or you would take out your BlackBerry and read it and email back. The TLC then passed a rule saying that handheld devices were illegal and in violation unless they were mandated by the TLC. So the TLC apparently felt at that time, and again, all of this precedes Chairman Yaski, but the TLC felt at that time that it would be okay to make an exception to a New York State law. There were many other flaws with the dispatch system, and if you were...
Where are you now?
I'm towards the last page. I've skipped quite a bit in my reading.
We were noticing. So you're on page 9 now?
I'm on the last page, I guess. That's page 9.
Okay.
Okay. There are quite a lot of other problems with the dispatch system, and members of the Assembly, I would strongly invite questions by you. We have extensive experience with this. We're the only corporate owners that were involved in this program. There are individuals that were individual owner-operators that are limited to individuals. We were actually the only owners involved in the program. So we have extensive experience with the dispatch program. I would invite the opportunity to go over the many, many problems that we faced in that program. We have several suggestions for making an accessible program work, which I'd like to go over with you if
go ahead.
I'm invited. Any program for accessible taxis must keep the integrity of the dual system intact. Yellow taxis are exclusively for street hail. FHVs are exclusively for dispatch. The rules for the FHVs should be enforced. For Hire Vehicle Rule 607, which mandates that livery bases serve the disabled, should be strictly enforced and policed. Up until Chairman Ziaski administration, it never was. The rules should be expanded, as Assemblyman Kellner suggested. Currently, the base is in compliance if it dispatches an accessible vehicle or if it has a contractual or other relationship with a base that could. This is obviously problematic. We suggest, as Assemblyman Kellner suggested, that there be a proportionate number of owned accessible vehicles by each base, commensurate to the amount of cars that are dispatching at that base. The city can go a little bit longer in making it easier for accessible users to pick up taxis by providing accessible stands. These stands should be conspicuously placed at high-volume locations like hotel districts, train stations, arenas, etc. This would let the driver and passengers alike have knowledge of where they can and are likely to find each other. Current training for drivers, I was interested to learn, Chairman Yaski said that the training would still go on. This is going to present a problem because that, again, limits the number of people that would, since it's a voluntary program, it limits the number of drivers we would have. Again, our biggest problem is that since there are 47,000 potential customers and we only have a few hundred, we have cars sitting against the wall. Continuing the training at this level and making it voluntary.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. A taxi driver cannot pick up a wheelchair user unless they have some kind of training, unless they've met some training requirement?
Under the current TLC rules, they're not allowed to take the TLC vehicle out. If it's an accessible vehicle, it must be in the program. If it was, which is expired, but as Chairman Yaski said, he's going to continue. He said it here today. He's going to continue
and
the
is this
training.
For the yellow cabs only?
This is for yellow accessible taxis only.
But is there a training requirement for the for hire vehicle industry?
No.
All right, go on.
No, not as far as I'm aware. So the accessible taxis must be in the training program to drive the accessible taxis. That would limit our driver pool if
But
that
there's
is
no dispatch
if that is
program.
enforced. But there's no dispatch program.
Are they going to just limit it to the training about how to use the ramp and how to deal respectively with the rider, or are they going to still teach them about the BlackBerry? Which
I wish I knew the answer to that. This was the first time I heard that the training program was going to continue. So I don't know the answer to that question. The BlackBerry system is dead, and I would
go on with your recommendations.
Okay. The other is that if we are going to ever get to a point where we're going to have drivers driving accessible taxis, then the sensibility training should be incorporated into the taxi school, and new drivers issued should have that sensibility training as well, not just limited to the taxi drivers who voluntarily go into the program. We've had problems at Port Authority with airports. Obviously, this is not in the mayor's control, but we've had problems with the Port Authority. The Port Authority is a very good place to have accessible lines. There are always users coming off of airplanes that need accessible taxis. They should have the ability to match up quickly with the cars. Taxis should always be able to jump the line and have an ability to pick up an accessible taxi should always have the ability to pick up a wheelchair user. Of course, the state can assist in the financial encouragement of manufacturers to develop affordable, fuel-efficient, low-emission, accessible cars by offering various tax incentives. The one point that I do take a little bit issue is the ADA compliance, Assemblyman Kellner. I think that if we're far from getting the vehicle that we need to serve both the accessible issue and the low fuel emissions and economy. Waiting for ADA compliant may push this program back many years. I'm open to any questions that anyone might have.
Well, first, thank you for testifying today, Mr. Gerber. I know that the Greater New York Taxi Association has really been at the forefront. You spoke earlier about the fact that you've gone through many generations of taxis. You've been on the cutting edge of trying every different type of accessible vehicle, and you spoke about how the accessible Toyota Sienna minivan is the best so far, but it still doesn't compare to non-accessible versions. Do you know how much longer the life, or less of a life, the Toyota Sienna accessible has had versus